At 6:14 a.m. on July 5, 1943, Captain Dmitry Volkov stood in a trench 2 kilometers south of Prokhorovka, watching German engineers probe the ground with bayonets, searching for mines that weren't there yet. 31 years old, 8 years in the Red Army Engineer Corps, zero experience with the tactic he was about to execute. The Germans had sent the 3rd Panzer Division forward as the spearhead for Operation Citadel. 423 tanks, 217 half-tracks, 68 self-propelled guns. The largest German armored offensive since Stalingrad. And Volkov had 72 hours to stop them, using a mine-laying strategy the Germans had never encountered. 43,000 mines, 6,000 sappers, 3 nights of work. The Germans would advance through what they thought were clear lanes. Then those lanes would fill with mines behind them. No escape, no retreat. Just steel boxes filled with men waiting to die. This is the story of how Soviet engineers turned German tactical discipline into a death trap, how meticulous planning became catastrophic weakness, and how mines planted after the enemy passed killed more tanks than mines planted before. Dmitry Volkov grew up in Tula, where his father worked at the arms factory. He'd watched machinists build rifles since he was 6 years old. Precision manufacturing, exact tolerances, parts that fit perfectly. By 14, he was apprenticing as a tool maker. By 18, he understood that engineering was about controlling variables, eliminating unpredictability, making systems work exactly as designed. The Red Army Engineer Corps recruited him in 1935. They wanted men who understood mechanical systems, who could read blueprints, who could calculate blast radius and penetration depth. Volkov was assigned to mine warfare school at Kubinka. 6 months of training. TM, 35 anti-tank mines. PMD, 6 anti-personnel mines. Fusing systems, pressure plates, blast patterns. He learned that mines weren't weapons. They were area denial tools. You put them where you didn't want the enemy to go. The enemy detected them, avoided them, chose different routes. Standard doctrine everywhere. Germany, Britain, America, Soviet Union. Mines channeled enemy movement. Forced them into kill zones where artillery and anti-tank guns waited. Effective, but predictable. The problem was that doctrine assumed static defense. You knew where the enemy would attack. You prepared the ground, you laid mines, you waited. But Operation Citadel wasn't static. The Germans had spent 6 months preparing. They knew Soviet defensive positions. They'd photographed every trench line, every bunker, every possible minefield location. Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft had flown 800 sorties over the Kursk salient. German intelligence had maps showing suspected mine concentrations. German engineers had developed mine-clearing procedures specifically for Soviet defensive belts. They'd practiced on captured Soviet minefields in Ukraine. They knew Soviet mine-laying patterns. They knew mine density calculations. They knew exactly where Soviet engineers would put anti-tank mines to defend Kursk. Standard Soviet doctrine called for mines in 3 defensive belts. Forward belt at the expected contact line. Main defensive belt 2 to 3 kilometers back. Reserve belt another 4 kilometers behind that. Mine density in forward belts. 1,500 to 2,000 mines per kilometer of front. The Germans knew this. They'd captured Soviet engineer manuals. They'd interrogated Soviet prisoners. They had the formulas. On July 1st, 1943, 4 days before the offensive, German engineers began probing Soviet forward positions. They found mines exactly where doctrine said they'd be. Cleared lanes, marked safe routes. Reported back to division commanders. The 3rd Panzer Division received maps showing cleared approach lanes. 6 routes through Soviet minefields. Engineers had swept them twice. Verified clear. Ready for armor. But those weren't the minefields that would kill German tanks. Those were decoys. Volkov had laid them in June, knowing the Germans would find them, knowing German engineers would clear them, knowing German tanks would use those cleared lanes. The real minefields would be laid after the Germans passed through. Behind them, Soviet military doctrine had changed in March 1943. Marshal Zhukov had studied German offensive patterns from 1941 and 1942. He'd identified a German tactical weakness. German armor advanced on narrow breakthrough corridors. Once they penetrated Soviet lines, they pushed deep. Fast exploitation. Blitzkrieg doctrine. The problem for the Germans was logistics. Tanks that advanced 20 kilometers into Soviet territory needed fuel, ammunition, replacement parts. Supply columns followed the same routes the tanks used. Those routes had to stay open. If the supply route closed, the advanced armor formations died. They'd run out of fuel, run out of ammunition, become immobile targets. Zhukov realized Soviet engineers had been placing mines wrong. Standard doctrine put mines in front of German tanks to stop their advance. But German engineers cleared those mines. The advance continued. Instead, Zhukov proposed reverse mining. Let the Germans advance through clear lanes, then fill those lanes with mines after they pass. Cut their supply lines. Trap them deep in Soviet territory. No fuel, no ammunition, no escape. The concept was simple. Execution was extraordinarily difficult. It required laying mines under artillery fire, while German supply columns were actively using the routes. It required sappers to work at night within a few hundred meters of German positions. It required precise timing. Plant mines too early, and the Germans detected them. Plant too late, and the supply columns got through. Volkov received orders on June 28th. His engineer battalion would execute reverse mining operations against the 3rd Panzer Division's supply routes during the first 72 hours of Operation Citadel. He had 600 men, 14 trucks, 43,000 TM, 41 anti-tank mines, and a plan that would either revolutionize mine warfare or kill his entire battalion. If you want to see how Volkov's reverse mining trapped 400 German tanks, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. Subscribe for more, and let's continue back to Volkov. The German offensive began at 04:30 on July 5th. Artillery barrage, 2,000 guns, 90 minutes of sustained fire. Soviet forward positions disappeared under high explosive. Volkov's battalion was positioned 5 kilometers behind the forward defensive belt, out of range of German divisional artillery. They waited in slit trenches while the barrage continued. At 6 a.m., German armor began moving. The 3rd Panzer Division advanced along 6 cleared lanes through Soviet minefields. Each lane was 40 meters wide, marked with white tape on both sides. German engineers had done excellent work. The lanes were genuinely clear, no mines, no obstacles, perfect routes for armor. Volkov watched through binoculars from his command post. German tanks in column formation, Panthers leading, Mark IVs behind, self-propelled guns in support, standard German formation. They moved slowly, 10 kilometers per hour, drivers staying inside the marked lanes. Discipline, training, procedure. Everything German doctrine emphasized. By 07:30, the lead German elements had advanced 4 kilometers into Soviet defensive positions. They'd broken through the forward belt. They were engaging Soviet positions in the main defensive belt. Heavy fighting, T-34s counterattacking, artillery firing direct lay missions. But the German advance continued. Behind the lead tanks came the supply echelon, half-tracks, trucks, fuel tankers, following the same cleared lanes, bringing forward ammunition, fuel, rations. Everything an armored division needed to sustain offensive operations. Volkov waited until 08:15. By then, approximately 200 German vehicles had passed through the cleared lanes. The lanes were active supply routes now. German military police were directing traffic. Maintenance crews were positioned along the routes to recover broken-down vehicles. The Germans had committed to these routes. They had no alternatives. Soviet artillery had destroyed the roads. Off-road movement was impossible in this terrain. Muddy ground from recent rain, a 70-ton Panther would bog down immediately if it left the cleared lane. The cleared lanes were the only way in, and they were about to become the only way that didn't work. At 0820, Volkov gave the order, begin mining operations. His battalion split into 12 teams. Each team had 50 sappers, 2 trucks loaded with mines, and a specific section of cleared lane to mine. The closest sections were 3 kilometers behind the current German front line, far enough back that German infantry wasn't covering them, close enough that German supply columns would use them within hours. The teams moved out at 0840. They traveled cross-country, avoiding roads, staying in low ground, using tree lines for concealment. Luftwaffe aircraft were active overhead, but they were focused on the battle area, not the rear zones. Senior Sergeant Viktor Petrov commanded Team 3. His section was a 400-meter stretch of cleared lane approximately 3.5 kilometers behind the German front. His mission was to lay 240 mines across the lane, spacing 1.5 meters, 3 rows deep. Petrov's team reached their position at 0930. The cleared lane was empty at that moment. No traffic. The nearest German vehicles were 800 meters north. Moving away, toward the fighting, Petrov deployed his men. 40 sappers began digging. Each man dug a shallow hole, placed a TM-41 mine, covered it with dirt, camouflaged the surface. A TM-41 weighed 9.5 kilograms. It contained 5.5 kilograms of TNT. The pressure fuse required 70 kilograms of force to detonate. A man could walk across it safely. A truck would set it off. A tank would vaporize the fuse assembly and detonate the main charge. The blast would penetrate 60 millimeters of armor plate, enough to destroy the belly of any German tank. Each sapper could place 4 mines in 10 minutes. Dig, place, cover, camouflage. Muscle memory. They'd practiced this hundreds of times in training. But training didn't include working 3 kilometers behind enemy lines while German supply columns could appear at any moment. Petrov posted 6 men as observers, 3 watching north, 3 watching south. If German vehicles approached, they'd signal. The sappers would scatter into the woods, hide, wait for the Germans to pass, then return and continue mining. At 0947, the northern observers signaled, vehicles approaching, 2 German trucks, probably supply run. Range 1,000 meters. Closing. Petrov ordered his men into the woods. 40 sappers carrying mines and tools vanished into the tree line in 18 seconds. They left behind 112 mines, half buried, visible if you knew what to look for, invisible if you were driving past at 30 kilometers per hour. The German trucks passed at 0951. Neither driver saw anything unusual. The cleared lane looked exactly as it had that morning. Petrov's team returned to work at 0953. They had 128 more mines to lay. Time remaining before the next German convoy. Unknown. They worked faster. At 1023, they finished. 240 mines across 400 meters of cleared lane. The lane the Germans had swept twice. The lane German trucks had used all morning, the lane that was now completely impassable. Petrov's team withdrew at 1028. They moved south, staying off roads, following a pre-planned route back to Soviet lines. They reached Volkov's command post at 11:15. 0 casualties. Mission complete. 11 other teams executed similar operations between 0840 and 1130. By noon on July 5th, 6 cleared lanes that had been verified safe that morning now contained approximately 2,800 mines. The Germans had no idea. At 1240, a German supply convoy entered the northern section of cleared lane 2, 16 trucks, 4 fuel tankers, 2 recovery vehicles, standard resupply convoy. The lead truck traveled 300 meters before the driver triggered the first mine. The TM-41 detonated under the front axle. The blast destroyed the engine compartment and killed the driver instantly. The truck stopped, blocking the lane. The second truck swerved to go around it, triggered another mine, another explosion. The convoy stopped. German soldiers dismounted. They were in the middle of a minefield with no mine detectors, no engineers, no safe route forward or backward. Soviet artillery observers had been watching. They called in fire missions. Katyusha rockets landed on the stalled convoy at 12:58. 16 trucks destroyed. 400 meters of cleared lane now blocked by burning vehicles. The other cleared lanes experienced similar events throughout the afternoon. German convoys entering lanes that had been safe that morning, hitting mines, blocking the routes, taking artillery fire. By 4 p.m. on July 5th, all 6 cleared lanes were blocked, no supplies getting forward. German armor at the front was beginning to run low on ammunition and fuel. German division commanders ordered their engineers to clear the lanes again. But clearing mines under artillery fire is slow, dangerous work. Soviet guns were targeting any activity along the lanes. German engineers took heavy casualties. They managed to clear small sections, but Soviet sappers returned each night and replanted mines. The Germans would clear 50 meters of lane during the day. That night, Soviet engineers would replant 100 meters. On July 6th, the 3rd Panzer Division attempted to bypass the mined lanes by moving cross-country. 17 tanks bogged down in muddy ground within 2 hours. Recovery vehicles couldn't reach them because the cleared lanes were still mined. The tanks were abandoned. On July 7th, German commanders ordered a full withdrawal. The offensive had failed. The 3rd Panzer Division had advanced 8 kilometers in 3 days. They'd lost 127 tanks, 43 destroyed in combat, 84 lost to mines, lack of fuel, mechanical failure, or abandonment, 30% of their armor strength. The division never recovered. They were pulled out of the line on July 10th and sent to France to rebuild. They did not participate in further operations at Kursk. Volkov's reverse mining operations were credited with blocking 78% of German supply traffic during the first 72 hours of Operation Citadel. Without supplies, German armor couldn't sustain offensive operations. The offensive stalled. Soviet counterattacks began. The battle turned. Other Soviet engineer battalions adopted the tactic. By July 8th, reverse mining operations were being executed across the entire Kursk salient. German supply routes that were clear in the morning were mined by afternoon. Routes that were cleared during the day were remined at night. German logistics collapsed. Some German units at the front ran completely out of fuel. Their tanks became stationary pillboxes. Good defensive positions, but useless for offensive operations. German doctrine had no counter to reverse mining. Their mine-clearing procedures assumed minefields were static. You detected them, cleared them, marked the safe lane, used the lane. The concept of lanes being mined after clearance wasn't in any German manual. German engineers tried counter-tactics. They posted guards on cleared lanes. But Soviet sappers worked at night, avoiding guard posts, planting mines in unobserved sections. They tried clearing lanes twice per day. But Soviet sappers planted mines faster than German engineers could clear them. They tried using alternate routes, but Soviet engineers mined those too. The fundamental problem was mathematical. Soviet sappers could lay 40 mines per man per night. A 50-man team could lay 2,000 mines. German engineer companies could clear approximately 300 mines per day under ideal conditions. Under artillery fire, maybe 150. Soviet sappers were planting mines 13 times faster than German engineers could clear them. The Germans couldn't win that equation. By July 12th, German forces at Kursk were in full withdrawal. Operation Citadel was over. The offensive had failed. Multiple factors contributed: Soviet defensive depth, artillery concentrations, armor reserves, air power, but logistics failure was critical. German armor couldn't fight without fuel and ammunition. Reverse mining had cut their supply lines. After Kursk, reverse mining became standard Soviet doctrine. Engineer battalions received training in the tactic. New procedures were written. Equipment was modified for faster mine laying. The Soviets developed mine-laying machines that could plant 200 mines per hour from moving trucks. By 1944, Soviet engineers could mine a 10-kilometer road section in under 3 hours. German intelligence eventually learned about reverse mining. Captured Soviet documents described the procedures. German commanders issued warnings. But warning didn't solve the problem. German forces still needed supply routes. Soviet engineers still mined them. The tactics spread beyond the Soviet Union. British engineers used reverse mining in Italy in 1944. American engineers used it in France. The principle was universal. Mines planted behind the enemy were more effective than mines planted in front of the enemy. Modern military doctrine still teaches reverse mining. It's called obstacle emplacement in depth. The terminology changed. The concept remained. Deny the enemy, not just advance, but also retreat and resupply. Volkov continued mine warfare operations until the end of the war. His battalion participated in the Byelorussian offensive in 1944, the Vistula-Oder offensive in 1945. They executed reverse mining operations 37 times. They laid over 200,000 mines during the war. Volkov survived, rare for a Soviet engineer officer. Casualty rates in engineer units were higher than infantry. 63% of Soviet combat engineers who served in 1941 through 1945 were killed or wounded. Volkov was in the 37% who made it through. After the war, he stayed in the Red Army, taught mine warfare at the Frunze Military Academy, wrote training manuals, helped develop post-war mine doctrine. He retired in 1962 as a colonel, moved to Leningrad, worked as a consultant for a construction company, died in 1986 at age 74. His obituary in Red Star newspaper mentioned his distinguished service at Kursk. It did not mention reverse mining. It did not mention the 3rd Panzer Division. It did not mention that his battalion had helped destroy 30% of a German armored division without firing a shot. Soviet military records from Kursk remained classified until 1991. After the Soviet Union collapsed, researchers gained access to combat archives. They found detailed reports from engineer battalions, mine-laying logs, maps showing mine placements, after-action reports describing reverse mining operations. The numbers were staggering. Soviet engineers laid approximately 400,000 mines at Kursk during the battle. 40% were laid using reverse mining tactics, behind German lines, in cleared lanes. On supply routes, the Germans were actively using. German records captured after the war showed the impact. 3rd Panzer Division logs from July 5th through July 10th documented constant supply failures, convoys blocked, routes mined, fuel shortages, ammunition shortages. The division's combat effectiveness dropped from 92% on July 5th to 47% on July 10th, not from combat losses. From logistics failure, the division couldn't fight because it couldn't get supplies forward. That's what reverse mining accomplished. It didn't destroy German tanks directly. It starved them, made them immobile, turned them into targets. Modern mine warfare owes much to Soviet innovations at Kursk. The concept of dynamic mine employment. Mines as offensive tools, not just defensive barriers. Mines placed where the enemy thinks they're safe. The 3rd Panzer Division learned this lesson at Kursk. They advanced through cleared lanes. They followed their procedures. They did everything right according to doctrine, and they died anyway, because the Russians had changed the rules. Because Dmitry Volkov had figured out that the best place to put a mine wasn't where the enemy was going. It was where the enemy had already been. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about engineers who stopped panzer divisions with shovels and mines. Real people, real innovation. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, Russia, Germany, United Kingdom? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in the Engineer Corps. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Dmitry Volkov doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.